beginning to get it. Now you then go right to the heart of the issue, the justice issue, right? And now we go to, the principles of civility in the culture. It's not just what's moving us ethically. It's not just the ground of truth that we are trying to objectify, but it's justice itself. The first principle is the one that St. Augustine enunciated, almost 1,600 years ago. What did he say? An unjust law is no law at all, because justice is superior to the positive law. Positive law is like a law that's passed by a legislature or is passed, effectively by a court or something of that nature. It's of human production. Every human produced law, every positive law must be consistent with basic justice. And in being consistent with basic justice, that would actually help the person in that consistency to overcome injustice. As a matter of fact, in our Declaration of Independence, you can see pretty clearly that the founding fathers said, "Why are we going to free ourselves from Britain?" Well, we're freeing ourselves from Britain because that's an unjust law, and we don't have to accord an unjust law. I mean, we can see it in everybody who's done this. And so, the students say, "Well, what do you think about abortion?" Well, I said it certainly violates the principle of non-maleficence. It certainly violates the most basic form of human justice and ethics. It certainly, kills unnecessarily, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think? Do you think this is an injustice? Yes, of course. It's a positive law that sanctions killing of innocent people. It's unjust. And the light is starting to turn on. And then we talk about Francisco Suarez and how he developed the inalienable rights theory that went to Grotius and Locke and Jefferson and so forth. And when we talk about that, we say, what is an inalienable right? It's an obligation that belongs to me by my very nature. It can't be alienated from me because it belongs to me. It was never given to me by a state. It was never given to me by a court. It belonged to me from the moment of my creation. It belongs to me because of my very human existence, and that's why it can never be taken away from me. Jefferson stated it in the Declaration of Independence. He said it so easily. He just simply says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all," he said men, but now of course we know what that term means inclusively, "were created, were endowed by their Creator with the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." You look at that, that is a piece of artistry, legal truth in the most succinctly stated fashion imaginable. And the reason that the inalienable rights do not show up in the Constitution is because the Constitution declares rights by a civil body. So our good, freedom of speech and freedom of press and so forth and so on, all these things are declared into existence by the state, but the state could declare them out of existence. And so the founding fathers of this country didn't want inalienable rights even to appear as if they were declared into existence by a civil body. They're given by the Creator. We know this self-evidently. We don't need a state to declare them into existence because they belong to every human being by their very nature. Now they get the idea of what an inalienable right is. And then we get to the heart of the matter. Let's look at the logic of Dred Scott that denied, African Americans, denied them their freedom. Basically, thank you. Basically, they said to the court and to the people of the United States, we didn't find any evidence in the Constitution that black people have civil rights. Therefore, they don't. Therefore, you can subjugate them to the superior race. Now, those two therefores are just dead wrong. They forgot inalienable rights. The very thing in the Declaration, the very thing that justified our revolution, the very thing that became the heart and the soul and the center of our culture and the founding fathers Forgot them entirely. And in Roe versus Wade, we see the same logic. They forgot inalienable rights completely. They acted as if the only kind of rights that were there were constitutional rights declared into existence by that body, the Constitutional Convention. And finding that it didn't seem to be the case, even though there's court precedents everywhere present to the contrary, finally they say, well, therefore, again, in doubt, go ahead, we'll sanction killing. It's okay. Kill the preborn innocent. We'll figure it out later. That gets the kids. The third thing, they get it. This is another principle, and that principle is the hierarchy of rights. You'll always notice from the time of Suarez through Grotius, Locke, the Declaration of Independence, the UN Charter, you'll always notice that life precedes liberty, liberty precedes property, and precedes the pursuit of happiness. Why is that? Because of what we call the necessity criterion. The necessity criterion just simply states this. If one right is necessary for the very possibility of another right, then the right which is necessary must be higher. It must be a higher right than the other one. Pretty clearly then, we can see that is life necessary for the very possibility of liberty? Sure, because if you're dead, your liberty rights are a moot question. So, very clear. The same thing with property rights, right? Can a white man's property right be more important than a black man's liberty rights? No, because the liberty rights are by definition, according to the necessity criterion, they're higher than property rights. If I say to you, oh, Camille, you can own all the property you want, but I get to own you. De facto, I own all your property too. Of course, it's necessary. Now we get to the kids and we say, okay, well, what do you think about this? And the kids go, oh, so the privacy rights of a woman can't outweigh the life rights of a human being? Uh-huh. And if you want to violate that hierarchy, well, then you can just join the slave traders, back in 1854, and you can go ahead and be on the side of Dred Scott versus Sanford. You can say the property rights of white people outweigh the liberty rights of black people. You just violated the hierarchy once, you may as well violate it again. And the kids begin to get it. Going right down the line, we show, you violate this in Roe v. Wade, take a look at the same violation in Dred Scott versus Sanford that justified slavery. Go right down the line. Principle of justice, the principle of inalienable rights, the principle of the hierarchy of rights. You can see all the violations right and left in both documents. And then comes the crucial question. Ladies and gentlemen, so you think you can violate these principles in one place, but you will not violate them in another place? Justify that distinction. How the principles themselves, which are the foundation of all civility, should be relativized to anything else. And they go, oh, you mean I have to be consistent? Yeah, that's part of the principle of non-contradiction. Right up there, principle number 2. And then, of course, that's the kind of the D-Day moment. When we combine this with the evidence from the 4 levels of happiness, we combine this with all the work we do in the categories of discourse, but above all, these principles of civility, they're so important. The secular culture embraces them. If that is the case, then I assure you, many, many students will turn and really change their minds on this. I was just mentioning one on the video there that we had 50% pro-abortion among the students when we begin the classes, and of the 50% who are pro-abortion, it was turned into 18% more or less after the presentation of these principles and the levels of happiness. In other words, it really works. Principles are the way to go. Getting out of the emotion of the moment is the way to go. Getting them to think is the way to go. Embracing civility is the way to go. And then you show them that this came out of not only the great Constitution, Declaration of Independence, but also came out of Christianity itself. It really was the work, the inspiration of Jesus Christ and those who followed him. Thanks so much for supporting this approach to the pro-life movement. As I said, I think it does really work, but above all, it gets us out of the emotion, back to thought, back to principle, back to the true manifestation of the heart in the most complete explanation that we can gather. Thanks so much for your attention this evening.